the News of Ukraine agency. My name is Oleg Deneka, and my special guest today is the founder and CEO of the NGO Legacy of War Foundation. In 2022, he was announced as the first United Nations global advocate for persons with disabilities in conflict. The Ukrainian audience knows him from the footage for clip Obimy of the Ukrainian music group Okean Elzy. Also, Giles Duley is best known for his work documenting the long-term impact of war, for his photo shot with Angelina Jolie, but today we are shooting him himself.
First off, thank you for having me here today. Ukraine has a very close place in my heart. I first came to the country in 2010. I came to Odessa to do a story there. I'm a photojournalist, and ever since I've been coming, since 2015 specifically, I've been coming here and documenting the impact of the conflict. But my work is always about civilians impacted by war. And for me, there is no more important issue than me covering right now what's happening in Ukraine. I'm a photographer, but I'm also a survivor of a landmine explosion in Afghanistan. But my main reason for this specific visit is to talk about the issue of landmines. I've been documenting their impact for over 25 years around the world, from Angola, Cambodia, Colombia, Vietnam, Laos, Iraq, Syria. I've been documenting since 2015 landmines in Donbass. But right now we are dealing with a country that is the most contaminated in the world.
Yes, exactly.
An issue that will last for generations.
How do you want to do this? How do you plan to attract the people, the authorities, for example?
Well, you know, I'm a photographer at my heart. I do many other things, but at my heart I'm a storyteller. And people always say, but do you think one of your photographs can change the world? No, but maybe it can inspire the person that can. So my first job is to come here and to document what I see. You know, in the last few weeks, I've been out with CESU, seeing their demining projects. I've been out with HALO and MAG international organizations working here. I've been meeting survivors, really doing a sort of documentary of all aspects of the landmine issue across the country. That exhibition is going to be a partnership with my foundation, Legacy of War, and the UNDP. We're going to be showing that in Kiev so people can come and see that exhibition. But more importantly, we're going to tour that around the world, both in places such as Germany, New York, so that people can learn the stories of what actually landmines mean. Because sometimes it's almost like an abstract concept. You know, you see a field and you say, oh, there's landmines in there. People don't really understand what does that mean. It's not just about the people injured. It's the fact that farmland can't be used. It's the fact that children can't go and play in the forest. It's that the babushka can't go and collect the mushrooms safely. It impacts the whole of society. And the psychological harm is another thing that people don't realize. You don't know.
It's exactly community trauma.
Exactly. You know, I've documented communities, I say, around the world, and when somebody is injured by a landmine, that whole community is traumatized because then they think, how do we go out? What do we walk? A child knowing if you walk across this side, if you cross this side, you may be blown up by this mystery thing under the ground. The psychological trauma of that is incredible. I remember years ago going to Angola and visiting villages which had returned after the fighting, and they knew somewhere there'd be landmines. And normally the mines would be planted, for example, where you go and collect water, or the farmland on one side of the village. And I remember a child had been injured in this community, so everybody was terrified, because even if it was just one mine, that can stop a whole community from rebuilding. And that's the psychological trauma, as you said, of a community that's affected by this issue. And people are impatient. You know, I've been down in the Kherson region and met farmers that are producing their own devices to go on the front of tractors to start clearing. Because at the end of the day, they can't wait. They can't hold on because...
The same situation in Ukraine. Our farmers...
Exactly. This is what I've seen. I've gone down, I've met the farmers that are building these contraptions to go on the device, you know, using remote control or even on tractors as they go. But then I also remember being here 5 years ago and meeting a farmer who'd lost his legs because his tractor had driven over a mine. So this issue was going on even before the full-scale invasion. And so this is why it's so important to work on this issue now. You know, we have to work on it before victory and afterwards, because it's something that will continue, but we can't waste time. People say to me, why do you still go back to these places? And my answer is very simple. Now imagine for a moment
what I am saying. If we do not clear the landmines and UXOs in Ukraine, there is a child not yet born who will be killed by that legacy.
Is it more important to inform people not to go to this mined area?
You know, mine risk education is vital, especially for children, because sadly, you know, I've witnessed so often. I mean, a great example is the green parrot mine, the small butterfly mine that the Russians dropped. I saw this dropped in Afghanistan, and the amount of children you would meet who'd lost their hands because they'd seen it, thought it was a toy, pick it up, play with it, and it explodes. The weapons that are being used now are completely new. They're designed to be tamper. You touch them purposely. You know, I was talking to one of the sappers who was talking about underneath the anti-tank mine, a small anti-personnel mine. So you take that one out, it blows up. So people have to be educated that this is not as simple as they think. So that's really important. But you are telling people not to go on land. You're telling them not to go into the forest. You're telling them not to play. This is a temporary thing. Clearance is the only way forward.
Just one way.
Yeah.
You know, Russians now use artificial intelligence mining system, which is called hunting.
Yep.
It recognizes the step of human and, for example, the step of cat or dog, and nobody knows what we have to do with this.
Yeah. No, and unfortunately, there's always going to be this battle between new technologies of clearance and then new technologies of planting. That is war. This has always happened. You know, I've worked with MAG and HALO, two British NGOs that are at the forefront of demining. This is the first time I've seen them working in unison. You know, they're working together. There's an opportunity to bring all this knowledge from not just MAG, HALO, but from UNMAS, all the different organizations involved in demining, along with the Ukrainian authorities, to sit down and say, how do we approach this? It's a unique issue, a unique problem in a country of this size, but how do we embrace new technology? In the same way we have seen in the fighting of the conflict, new technologies have created a whole new way of fighting. Well, then we've had to find a whole new way of clearing these landmines and this issue.
This work is addressed to the international donors.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is, you know, the cost of doing this. We know this is a huge enterprise, but it makes economic sense as well.
Yes.
You know, over 30%
for the investment.
Exactly. You know, if you're looking at a country where, you know, 30% maybe is unusable right now, the amount of economy damage to that is huge. Whether it be farmland, whether it be, you know, rebuilding, all these different processes will be halted until we can clear that issue. And as I say, I've seen it in a country like Vietnam. You know, in Vietnam, 126,000 people have been injured since the war because of unexploded ordnance. There are huge areas of the country that cannot be used economically because of that legacy. So it makes sense that if you're an international donor and you want to support Ukraine in a humanitarian way and to rebuild the country, the first thing we have to do is to decontaminate the land of landmines and UXO, because you can't rebuild when under the ground there is a threat. At the end of the day, it's something under the ground that will kill for generations. And so it's the resolve to clear it is the first thing we need to do. So the first thing is to prioritize this with international donors, that they see this as something that has to be done to enable the economic development of Ukraine as a whole.
Maybe you know about some people who have to provide the demining in Ukraine from the side of international donors. I'm talking to you about Buffett.
Mm-hmm. I know the funding that's coming in for certain projects. For me, pushing capacity building is something that is kind of core to what we do, and it has to be core to whether it be Buffett, whether it be UN, whether it be
UNDP.
Whoever the international donors is. So I think we need to take that same philosophy into not just prosthetic care, but within the medical profession, psychologists, physiotherapists, but also into the demining capacity by training more people to have that capacity in country. Again and again, I've also seen that you get a sort of surplus of people coming when there's a crisis, and then everybody moves on to the next crisis. So how do we build capacity in Ukraine for not just clearance, but also for the rehabilitation of those injured? And now is the time to act. And I honestly believe altogether we can make a difference. I've been documenting this for over 20 years. Most places I go, you see that the clearance comes down to somebody on their knees with a small peg, going ch, 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 like
the
this.
same story. We have 2 years of war. And during this time, we have no decision or solving of demining, you know?
Now, of course, that's very important in certain areas. If you're working in your school, or if you're working where places have been purposely, for example, I saw it a lot in northern Iraq, where ISIS had purposely tried to plant things around schools. You need to do this. But when you are talking about the size of Ukraine, when you're talking about the size of this contamination, here's an opportunity to find new technologies and new ways of doing it. Drones are a great example. You can use ground-penetrating radar from a drone. There's great technology that I've been observing, which is to do with AI, where you take the same photograph and you can see how the grass grows differently over the areas of mine. So when the AI analyzes that, again, you can locate through that.
But we have very old and very Soviet technical standard. Any sapper, any deminer cannot use drones.
Yep.
For identification mines or explosive objects, for example, or for observing the mined area.
I remember coming here in 2015 and the military was very different, the way it worked, the way it thought. And we know the problems it was having at the beginning in 2015 or 14, 15 was going on. And I've seen that change. I've seen it in healthcare. This is an ongoing process. These things don't change overnight. I see this as an opportunity for Ukraine to become at the forefront of new technologies around demining. But you're right, we therefore have to look at the legislation to enable that opportunity to come.
The day before, Canadian Ministry of Defense announced 1 million drones for the Ukraine, especially for the demining and exactly for the front line.
Yep.
Using drones is crucial for demining Ukraine.
We have to find a new way of doing it because, as I say, there is something for me wrong that all these countries that I'm talking about, all these countries that I've been documenting for 20 years, why is it that so long after war, people are still dying? Why is it that in Vietnam, in Laos, in Cambodia, why is it in Colombia, why is it even in France and Belgium? Those countries still have not been fully cleared from wars 50 years ago or 100 years ago. This is, for me, a problem. There is something happening. Why is it that it was possible? You look at World War II across Europe, and most of that stuff was cleared because the will was there, the organization was there. So it's possible.
Not less is important to analyze corruption in our country. Before the interview, you told me about this like normal thing in the world.
Unfortunately, and I have seen this, globally, demining has been an issue where there has been corruption because it can be very, like you was also talking about how do we quantify the quality of demining? And so it's invisible. So if I was to say, I've cleared this field has been cleared to a depth of 2 meters, how do you know?
Now we have just one IT program for online control of demining. It is necessary for Ukrainians, for Ukrainian audience, it is necessary for Ukrainian authorities, and it is necessary for international donors to know where their money is spent on.
The international community has a role to play, and maybe that can help with monitoring. As I say, there's some amazing international NGOs in demining. It has to be made at an international level to say we are going to prioritize decontamination of Ukraine as a priority. And only when that happens can all these other processes you're talking about happen. Because at the moment, the funding is nowhere near what it needs to be to make that happen. That is the message I'm taking when I go around the world, because people will say, oh, there's corruption, there's all these issues. And I say, well, there has been a history of that, as there has been in many other countries. But there is a young generation coming through that is bringing a revolution, not just the physical revolution, but a mental revolution to the way this country is. And I'm inspired every time I come here. This energy I see in so many people to create a country that is strong and powerful, but is independent, is free,
and that's transparent.
And transparent. And that's what I see in young people. They want to create, a new vision. And the amount of young ministers I see, people in parliament with this new energy and this new generation. So that for me is what I need to focus on.
What about Ukrainian authorities? For example, Volodymyr Zelensky or Minister of Economy, Yulia Sviridenko, who is the main person solving the demining problems.
I met her last week. We had a really great chat. I took her portrait as well for part of this exhibition. But more importantly, we talked about the economic impact of mines across the country, how that's impacting.
If my work as a photographer, if my work as a storyteller, as the CEO of the Legacy War Foundation, means that one child does not have to suffer like I do every day, then my work will have been worthwhile. And I will keep working until the day I die to make sure that happens. That is what legacy means.
I want to transfer this conversation from the authorities to celebrities. And I have to ask you about Angelina Jolie, you know. We saw her in Lviv, as I remember.
The famous croissant now you can get there with. She is a friend and a colleague. She is a humanitarian. At her heart, she is one of the kindest, most generous people, and true, specifically children and women's rights. And she has a very close connection with Cambodia. That's a country that's very close to her heart. She has a home there, and so she knows firsthand from experience there about the legacy of landmines. Until recently, Cambodia was the most mined country as well.
Before the Ukraine.
Before this, exactly. So that's what I'm saying, is that she is very aware of that situation. For her, I'm sure she wants to highlight that issue. Talking about mines in Cambodia, I remember 5-6 years ago being there, meeting a man the same age as me. And he had been injured in a similar way as a child. He'd lost both legs. And he'd been a forced child soldier, and he'd stepped on a landmine. Now this man was no different to me. He was as resilient, as smart, as focused, as determined. But when I left, he took me to the side of this house, and there were 3 dog baskets on the floor. And he pointed at the biggest basket, and he said to me, "That's where I sleep." This man lived like a dog, same age as me. The only difference between him and me was the opportunity to have good prosthesis, good rehabilitation. And so that's what I do with my foundation, is to make sure people have that same opportunity. Now, Ukraine has so many great doctors, surgeons, prosthetists, but not enough. And so what we need to do is build capacity, because I want to make sure, not just in Ukraine, but around the world, people do not have to live like dogs because of a landmine, because of a UXO that injures them. Because everybody should have the same opportunity I have. My mission, for as long as it will be, will to make sure that every Ukrainian injured has a life as full as mine.
What do you need for this?
What do we need?
Yeah.
We are launching this week the first training for 14 injured Ukrainians. We're starting the process of asking people who would like to be part of this training program. So again, we're now looking for people to be in our first cohort. We have the funding, so that will take 18 months, and at the end of that, they will be qualified prosthetic technicians. So that's a starting point. That is the key thing that we can do, capacity building. And as I say, it's not just in the rehabilitation, but also in the clearance. I've always been impressed by Ukraine's innovation, by how people take technology here and develop it and come up with something new. It's not an opportunity anybody wants. Nobody wants this legacy, but it is a situation that's here. So I think there's an opportunity where Ukraine can change the way that demining works, not just in this country, but globally. I have knowledge after 25 years of covering conflicts around the world globally, and
unique experience,
and seeing the mistakes and seeing what's gone wrong, and asking those questions like, why are we still dealing with this issue in countries? How can we learn from this? The reason my foundation is called Legacy of War is because it's looking at this period after a conflict and saying, well, what can we learn from it, from all these shared experiences? Because, I'll be sitting in Cambodia, I'll be sitting in Iraq, Syria, wherever it is, and I shut my eyes, and the stories are the same, sadly.
Nevertheless, I have to ask you about how did you survive after the explosion, and how do you feel yourself now after the loss of 3 limbs?
Well, I just say, it was a very bad day at the office, But it's an important, when I say that, I'm joking, but I'm also being serious because it was my choice to be there. I am a photographer. I was working in Afghanistan. I was embedded with a group of American soldiers. We were ambushed. I was running for cover, and I stepped on an improvised explosive device that was actually made out of a Russian anti-tank mine. I was thrown in the air. I lost both my legs, my arm, but not my consciousness. I remember the whole thing. I was picked up by helicopter, in fact, I met some Ukrainian soldiers that were telling me how lucky I was that I was picked up by helicopter, because they were saying they were thrown on the back of a truck and when they got injured. But I spent a year in hospital. I spent 46 days in intensive care. They take me to the shower, I see myself in a mirror. And honestly, that was the moment I lost everything. I started crying, I felt physically sick. I was disgusted by the way I looked. I looked at myself missing these limbs and body, and I was just like, I don't want to be this person. I'll be honest, I did not want to live with a disability. I said, I'm not strong enough to deal with that.
Do you think that the same story, the same scenario, psychological scenario, is waiting for any person who maybe can be the victim of mine territory?
That's the difference for me is, that word victim and survivor. I think for me, I was a victim at the beginning because I felt this thing was done to me and I was angry with everybody. And then one day when I talk about this moment when I said, no, I'm going to take control of my life, that's when I became a survivor. And now I look at my life and I live a full life. I get to travel the world, I work as a chef, I run this foundation, I'm a photographer, all those things I wanted to do. But that was because of that mindset. That life lesson hasn't just changed my recovery, it's changed me as a person, it's made me, as a CEO of an organization, as a photographer, more successful. When I meet Ukrainians who have been injured, I have no advice, but I hope that they can see in me that there is hope, that there is a life ahead. Because I know,
as an example, yeah?
As an example, and that's all we can be. And I think that's also what many of us should be in life. There's too many people who talk, they don't give advice. I think always set an example first. Live the way you feel you should be living, and other people can see that.
And whatever you do it with love every day. Thank you.
Thank you.
No, thank
for
you.
supporting Ukraine.
Thank you.
Giles Duley, the first United Nations Global Advocate for Persons with Disabilities in Conflict, and he is the CEO and the founder of the NGO Legacy of War Foundation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.